Hey everyone, we're ready now for the next step of our Yuletide crossing project. We now have a completed quilt top and we are getting ready for basting. So let's get ready for the next step. So the first thing we need is backing fabric that is about 4 or 5 inches bigger on each side than our quilt top. And then we need a nice thin batting. And you can pick whatever batting you like. I just happen to have Quilter's Dream here. It's all cotton. Then clips. So these clips help to secure my batting and my backing to the table that I'm using. Now, depending on what kind of table you are using, you'll use a combination of clips or tape. This tape is just some random like masking tape. This happens to be double-sided because that's the only thing I can find right now in my studio. But any painter's tape or anything like that, just to temporarily hold your quilt backing and batting in some of the areas that we can't clip on, because obviously the surface that I'm using is not the exact size I need to baste this. But also be aware that you can baste on tables, putting them together, or if you need them a little wider, you just pull them apart and leave the table open in the middle to accommodate your quilt. So then we need some thread to baste, and I like to use something very contrasting to the quilt top that I am basting. And I like it to be a little bit heavier thread, but it doesn't have to be. And this is where you would use up any leftover or inferior thread that you might have from a long time ago and you're not too sure about it. But for this one, I'm going to use this navy or this teal, whatever is handy. I'm going to put one on one side and one on the other side when we're going along here. So we also need basting needles. Now, Primitive Gatherings has basting needles that are super long with a big eye, and they are nice and sturdy, and they're very difficult to bend. They come in a pack of 12 for $6. You'll also need a scissors to trim your threads. I also like to use a pincushion so I can place some of my pre-threaded needles in. All right, so those are the tools that we need for basting. Now let's start layering the quilt. So I have ironed my backing. I have my seam nice and flat and open. So it's nice and flat. I've laid this on, and I'm on the corner of a table. All right, so I like to use the clips. So this clip will clip right on my table, and I start in the middle of each side of my quilt. So in the middle here, over here in the middle. And I've kind of already got my backing already laid down here, you can see, and my backing laid on. You would do one at a time. Obviously, you wouldn't try to lay them both down, but for just the video's sake here, I've tried to pre-do a few things. So there's my tape on this side as well. And I'm always constantly pushing things out. So now I have to clip the corners. So I'm always going to take my hand and smooth across and clip the corners. Now I can't quite get to the corner here, so I am going to just make sure that this stays nice and taut. This corner up and lay that down. And then a couple more sections of tape. So now that I've done the corners, now I'm going to go in between and secure those down as well. Now this basting is actually temporary. It's all going to come out. So it doesn't have to be like super perfect. It just has to hold your quilt sandwich together. There. All right, so now I feel good about how the backing is secure and it's ready to put the top on. All right, now I'm ready to place my quilt top on top of my batting and my backing. So I kind of get it all in its position. And see how much space I have all the way around the perimeter? That's what we need. All right, so once I have it on, then I'm going to go to the center and I'm going to kind of smooth it out from the center out. We want to push all the excess to the outside edges. And like I said, the batting actually helps grab and hold the quilt top. All right, now I am ready to begin stitching. Okay, now we're ready to baste. I have figured out the center of my quilt is right where I have my scissors lying right now, and that's where I'm going to insert my needle. What I like to do is figure out how long my thread is from the center, about 6 inches past the edge, and I cut that. So then I don't have to have a knot in my basting stitches. So I kind of already figure out where that is. Put a knot in the edge of the thread, bottom end, and I'm just going to, somewhere in the middle of this center block, I am going to insert my needle and do a big stitch. There's my big tail, and I'm going to come right down the center of this row, the center row. Now these stitches are not pretty, and they don't have to be even, they don't have to be consistent, so don't spend too much time making these perfect basting stitches because they're just going to come right out. All we need to do is secure the top, the batting, and the backing together. So my stitches are probably bigger than an inch or so. And like I said, I'm coming right down the middle. And when I get to the end, I have enough thread to do a little bit of a knot off. So I take a bite and then I just do a couple stitches right in the same spot. And I like to place this ending like inside my binding, so I really don't have to take it out. So just a couple, 3-4 stitches right next to each other, right on top of each other. That can actually kind of stay in there if needed. So I'm going to, again, measure my thread. Now I'm going to do a cross. So I'm going to do north, south, east, and west through the quilt center. So that's the first thing you do when you're doing your basting stitches. And then when we're done with the 4 quadrants, and then we're going to concentrate on basting 1 quadrant at a time. And yes, you do get a little stretching while doing this. Good thing this is not a king-size quilt. I think for this video series, I think I took that into consideration to make a lap or a couch quilt. Again, about 1 inch long, and then when you get out to the end here, I'm going to move around the table. I'm going to load a couple stitches on top of each other right on the end here. Right down the center. And you see how you can line a couple stitches up before you pull your thread? You'll get really efficient at basting real fast if you don't have to pull every stitch through. And you see how my basting thread contrasts, so I'll be easily can pick it out when it comes time to do that. Okay, last side. All right, last row of the cross, starting from the center out. The sides are actually shorter, so they don't take as long. Make sure that knot you put in the end is a nice big chubby knot, so you don't pull it through. All right, now that the cross is done, we're going to work on one quadrant of the quilt. Okay, now I'm deciding how far apart and how much basting I want to put in this quadrant. Now I like to baste about 8 inches apart. I don't think you need to baste any closer than that for big stitch hand quilting. So this is my area here, and what I like to do is always start from the middle of the quilt and baste out, the middle, out, and then of course you're going to do the sides. And then we'd start and do this part. We'd start at the top here and go from the center out, from the center out. So just based on the grid of the quilt, I am going to place one right here in the middle and come down this just to the right side of this seam here. And again, always from the center out. We're always basting from the center out because we're pushing all the excess of fabric to the outer edges. And I'll explain later why you don't want to go the other way when we get on the edges. And of course, that always happens. Same thing, when I get down to the edge, just going to line a couple stitches on top of each other, right in that basting, in the binding line, I should say, not basting line. All right, where did I set the scissors down? Way over there. All right, thank you, Kaylee. All right, then clip that. So then we'd thread up again. I'm going to use a couple of these blue ones that I already had threaded. So here's my one line, here's my next line. I'm going to move over, and then the last one's going to go here. So I'm going to start from the center again and come out. And remember, you can use any old thread for your basting thread as long as it's contrasting and you can see it. Like, I don't like to use a color that's in my quilt. And if you need to put a thimble on to push your needle through, that also works nicely. And again, I'm just following the right side of this seam here. So thanks for being patient to watch me actually hand do all this. I know it takes time, but that's how we learn too. So it's just like taking a class. Only better, because you can rewind it and watch it anytime you want. Okay. Now, the outer edge. So, do you see why we wouldn't want to start here and go there? You always want, again, start from that middle and follow this outer edge, pushing the excess out, not going that way, always from the center out. And that'll make perfect sense once you do this yourself. And I did run a line of stay stitching on the outer edge of this quilt. If you remember to do that, it's really nice, so you don't pull any of your seam allowances apart from your blocks. And I like to leave my edge basting in my quilt. So I'm putting it inside that binding. I probably said that way too many times, but you'll get it. All right, down here on the edge. Couple stitches on top of each other. Now I've completely gone one direction from the center out. So next, I'm going to start with a long piece of thread that I don't have. Goes by quickly. Measure. Big knot in the end. Here's my center of my quilt, my center line. Now I'm probably going to do one here, and one here. So I'll have 3 more lines coming from the center line out. Now it's a little bit longer this way, so I'm going to go, instead of right next to this line, I'm going to go kind of in the middle of this block here. Divide that area up a little more. Again, basting is just temporary stitching the layers of the quilt together. So when you're hand quilting it, the quilt does not shift. So it's just a little security to make sure you don't get to the end of your quilt and you have no backing left or no batting. And I'm sure that has happened to some people. All right. I am kind of excited to quilt this quilt. I haven't hand quilted for a while now. And there's nothing like relaxing and putting stitches in a quilt. Would I want to quilt every quilt? No. But one with no deadline can be on the frame for when you want to just go sit for a while and put a row of stitches in. And hand quilted quilts feel a lot different than machine quilted quilts. A lot softer. And we'll for sure do a video on some of the hand quilted quilts that I have quilted. Both big stitch and fine heirloom hand stitched. When I first started, I did a lot of it. And then once you start making a living making quilts, you can't hand quilt them all. All right, now I'm just going to do the edge here. From the center going out, not here pushing it this way. Oh, I got a little knot. Sometimes that will happen when you have long threads. There, we got her. So you know how to baste a quilt now, Kaylee? Yep. So what I just did here on this quarter, we're going to continue to do on the other 3 quarters, starting from the center and stitching to the edge. And it does matter if you're right or left-handed what section's easier to do. All right, now I will continue stitching the other 3 sections and we'll be back. now with Kaylee's help, we're all done basting, and we're going to take the clips off of the quilt and release it. Maybe. Here we go. All right, now just want to flip it over and show you the grid. You cannot see, but trust me, there's a nice square grid running throughout the whole quilt. And now the last part is to prepare the edges for when it's placed on the quilt frame or in a hoop. Okay, the last part is very simple, but I think really necessary. And why I want to do this is because when you attach this to the quilt frame, it doesn't hurt the edges here of your quilt. So I quickly do a big running basting stitch, folding the edge of the back and batting up to protect the edges of the quilt. Maybe. Oh. And even though my backing is not like perfectly straight, I just bring up that batting so it almost touches the edge of the quilt. Or in your case, if the backing is a little bigger than the batting, that's the edge you bring up. All right, so that's one side done. For the next side, I would just fold it up like this. And I'm going to probably trim this batting off here because I don't want to see that batting. And then I baste all 4 sides. And then it's ready to mount on the frame.